We lost all zones. Taking B. Taking C. Domination.
There is to talk about.
Yeah. Shout out to Aquili I. Says, I feel like a kid again. Happy to be in school. There you go. Each one teach one. Craig says, lovely discussion. Stretchy on TikTok says, it's some gems in here. Appreciate both of you guys.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Let's get into it. Let's get into it, y'all. Let me see. Shared this information with relatives or colleagues? If so, what was their response?
Oh man, yeah, that's a good question. I love.
You know he ain't talking about this at the family reunion. No.
I think, man, why not? It's a fair question, man. Yes, I have. And everybody, of course, initially, obviously, mostly white people at this point in my life. But it's like, yeah, there's like a. But here's the thing. Once I start pointing out some things, you know, and then like it kind of works on them, and then they start to open up to it a little bit. You know, I'm like, have you ever felt like, how do you explain this? And they'll be like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm like, yeah, like, don't you think what I'm saying might? And then of course, since I kind of bring like a court, you know, I have experience. You know, I worked at IB. It'd be like, I can also talk about a way a lot of these type of people like, okay. Oh, that's all right. Well, he's making a good case. Like it's like he's making a good case for it, right? It's like, you know, it's the culture, right? It's like, okay, it's almost like I know how to like put it to them in a way that they might accept it. I guess what I'm trying to say, you know, with it. Yeah, I mean, obviously, most people are at a minimum like, how could you hide that? Like at some point, they're just like, but how could they have made up the lie and made it work, right? That I think is a lot of it. And then at that point, it gets pretty interesting with people. You start telling people, you know, these guys are the indigenous Indians that were here, and especially a lot of people that are, you know, Christian or whatever, you start maybe throwing out that word like Indios and the Hebrew and all that. That's something that like resonates with them in their, especially if they're Protestants, right? So they're gonna be like, well, wait, what? So yeah, it takes a little bit of like, kind of got to roll it out a little bit. I can't sit there and go, man, you guys are idiots. This is what really happened. That doesn't work, right? So what I got to do is be like, you know, I've been really looking at this stuff. And you guys know, like, I've always loved history. You know, so I said, you know, they know I am. And I'll be like, I'm telling you, man, that I'm not a conspiracy guy. Like, I'm not known as that guy. You know, I'm not the aliens guy. You know, I'm not the you know, I'm like, this is real. It's like what I'm trying to say. And I tell them, I'm reading legislation. I'm reading corporate charters. I'm reading missionary laws. You know, I'm saying I'm not reading what the Indians are telling me. I'm not reading what the black people, because that's the blacks, right? You know, the white people go, the blacks. Like, it's like, yeah. Stop. Please stop, right?
Oh, you've been watching those Negroes on TikTok. No, I've been reading the book from the Europeans that came here and built the country.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, you know, whatever. You got enough knuckleheads, they're just never going to confirm. But the other, like, you know, it's interesting once they can kind of get their mind around it to consider it. You'd be surprised. Like, they're like, okay, but I think one of the biggest things is just simply like, how the hell could they pull this off? But then I kind of go into that with people, especially around the Civil War. Because I point out to them that this is how everybody talked about it before the Civil War. A lot of what we're saying was conventional. So I said, so something happened, and we're the guys that come after, right? Especially the Europeans. They dumped so many over that weren't here before. They can tell us what
that real quick. Yeah. Let's touch on that. I think you're actually the first content creator I heard say this verbatim. You said something along the lines of, over 90% of Europeans today descend from immigrants that came after the Civil War.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say, but I'd say at least like 50 to 70. Like, here's what I'll say. They brought over from, say, basically well, really at the war until 1920, around World War I, guys. So you're talking like 60 years of this, 400,000 to 500,000 a year. So the numbers get big real quick. Understand the South only had a total of like 12 million people, like 4 million, even less than that. The country had about 30 million after the Civil War. So you start bringing over 1 million every 2 years. That's 3%. You know what I mean? My point is, those are huge numbers. And now the type of people they're bringing over from the Caucasus region in Russia, because the Russian Tsar is fighting. So the whole time the Indians over here get displaced, and there's like this insane amount of war effort against you guys. The Russians are over there doing it against the Balkans and the Caucasus region, and relabeling them all their tribes do. And then they're getting displaced and coming into Galveston, Texas. So just as many Europeans came from there as came from England, Ireland, Scotland. Like, that's the typical thing. Although we're all telling you, right, we're all from England, Ireland, Scotland. Right. Actually, about half of us are from, well, we don't really know, somewhere in the Caucasus. That's a whole other thing. They just call themselves because they came out of the port of the Emperor. It's just like you're talking about the Dawes Act, right? The Dawes Act, they look at you and they give you a label. They did the same thing to the Europeans. They looked at them like, well, you know, he could be Syrian, he could be German. They got serious guys. They literally did the same thing. It's like it's wild, but it's like they're displacing everybody simultaneously and moving people around.
If anybody wants to research this on their own time, if anybody's wondering why these European settlers would come here, risk life and limb, battling Indians and stuff to try to settle, you have to look up something called the enclosure. Around the same time, around the same time, they were taking the peasants and the serfs off of communal land ownership. Guys, look it up. The average European was living in, like, his house was like the size of a McMansion. I mean, sure, it's made out of wood and stuff, but they were living pretty good. But here comes the enclosure to privatize the land, force them on little land allotments, kind of echoing the whole Dawes Commission thing. And then they'd say, hey, look, life's not really looking real good for you in Europe. You ain't shit over here. You ain't never gonna be shit unless you were born into the aristocracy, right? But here's a better deal for you. We'll fund you getting on this boat, and the corporation will fund you going to settle in this new colony as long as you agree to work the land for X amount of years and do this and that. And guess what? It's not until they show up in America that they realize, wait a minute, they're giving us supplies to settle, and they're giving us firearms. Why do we need guns for it? Oh, yeah, there's some local black Indians that want to kill you guys for being here. Good luck.
Man, I mean, it's, right, I've done 2 deep dives, one in California on that, one in Florida. And I mean, in Florida, it's literally in the legislation. If you got 160 acres of land, you had to be a white European. You had to come down for 5 years, all right? After 5 years, then it was like yours. You didn't have to pay tax and cash for like 10 years after that. But here's what the kicker: you had to. This judge and reverend were auditing who showed up, and that's where you got your gun. So what they were doing was basically putting armed settlers. They were just putting bodies there with guns, and just putting them out there, man.
That's how the colony of Georgia started. They were in armed rebellion with the Spanish and the black Indians that were, allies with the Spanish, and they were going into the Carolinas and raiding plantations and liberating slaves. So they said, we need to put up a buffer area. We need to get some ponds to start this little area of Georgia so they can be cannon fodder and kind of be in between these battlegrounds. That's how you get Georgia.
It's bad, guys. I mean, in Florida's even later. What I'm talking about, Florida's like 1850s. So a lot of the stuff in the South, guys, in Texas, or I guess that's part of the South, but this is stuff that we can see going on after the Civil War. It's the nasty. I always tell people more colonization occurred after the Civil War than before. Yes. They had all these publicly traded, capitalized stock companies. They're all coming over here, and they're all the counties. So almost every county was like a corporation, and they're just bringing in Europeans, kicking out the Indians. They're calling Negroes now, right? That's what's going on. And then the Europeans are getting paid in company script that's only good at that company store in that county. So talk about slavery, right? These guys are stuck talk about being on a reservation, right? They're on a corporate reservation in a worse system. You see what I'm saying? Like, well, obviously by that point, just being black is the worst case. But what I'm saying is, like, they're bringing these guys over. It's not like the story is always like, and then after 2 or 3 years, the white settler got some land, and then he went on and he built the family. I'm like, guys, that's a big lie too. they were all dying to starvation. They're paupers. You're the hobos on the trains. Those are all the white guys that can't. They don't know how to farm, guys. They don't, and you're not gonna help them out, though, right? You guys are doing your thing, right? Everybody's like tribing up. Imagine so the white dude who's you see what I'm saying? So they're the hobos. They're the guys that are falling the vagabond all the way out there.
There was no stopping.
Things start to make more sense now. You're like, that's who they are. Yeah.
Get in school twice, dog. Die, fuck. Oh.
California is named after the quote-unquote myth of the black indigenous Amazonian Queen Califia.
I mean, there's a whole, well, I don't even think Georgia is named after King George. I think it's named after the Armenian Republic of Georgia, which used to be Iberia. There's a whole thing here. That's why you have guys like, you have names like